on Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
You're listening to The Jan Price Show, and my guest today is Tom Volf, who is a director, writer, and producer. And we're going to be talking about his new documentary, Maria by Callas. Welcome, Tom.
Hi.
Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. My first question always is, how did you become a documentary filmmaker?
Well, I think it's really Maria Callas that led me to become a documentary filmmaker, because I had already a background as a filmmaker in other areas, in publicity and advertising, institutional films, and it is really this project with Maria that led me to become a documentary director.
And it is a passion project. There's no question about that. So what led you to decide to do this documentary about Maria Callas, one of the world's beautiful singers in the world, actually, for last century and this one, I believe. So what led you to want to do a documentary about her?
Well, it all started 5 years ago for me. Actually, over 5 years ago, I had no idea who she was. I barely knew her name. And, it was a journey of discovery. One night I was living in New York, and I was walking by the Met Opera, and I just walked in and heard and saw my first Italian opera, which was really love at first sight, shall we say. And when I came back to my place that night, I searched the internet for Italian opera and bel canto and Donizetti, and the first thing that came up was an aria sung by Maria Callas, and that was so striking and so moving. It was such a unique experience, discovering that voice and that music, that art, which was hers, that it just moved me so deeply. It led me on a journey of discovery, and that journey very quickly led me to the desire of making a film that would be entirely in her own words, where she would be telling me and us and the audiences today her own story.
Interesting that you took that approach rather than interviewing people about her. Why did you? I mean, you in your research, obviously, you found her I mean, there's so much in this movie. I mean, I want to talk to you a little bit about all the archival footage that you have in this film. But why did you decide to go the route where she's really speaking in her own words rather than other people that you could have interviewed that knew her?
So actually, it was a journey in different steps, and actually I did a lot of interviews. I spent the first nearly year and a half, traveling the world on a quest to retrieve as many as possible of her friends and loved ones. And I was very lucky to meet a certain number of them, nearly 30 actually. And I have filmed interviews with each single one of them. And I did think in the beginning that the film would be a mix of interviews and, of course, of archival footage. But you see, all these meetings, all these encounters were each of them very unique and very special and meaningful, and each person unraveled a trove of personal archives and documents and films and private recordings and letters and things like that. And I was very lucky to be entrusted with all of this material throughout this first year of traveling and journey. And soon enough, I realized that at some point I would have enough material to make a film that would be actually much more challenging to make, but also so much stronger, more powerful, and more meaningful also, more genuine. That would be a film entirely in her own words. Therefore, at one point, I just decided very clearly to put aside everything that I had filmed myself, all the interviews and all of that, and focus on all the archival footage and make the film entirely 100% out of archival footage. It felt to me like this was the right way and also the only way to bring out the truth a genuine feeling about who she truly was. Because this is someone about whom so many things have been written and said and done over the years, in her lifetime, even after her passing, the last 40 years, that to make something new and to make something worthwhile, it felt like it needed to be in this way. Because so much mistruth has been said about her that she never really got able to tell her own truth, to say her own version of the stories and to set the record straight. And that's one of the things that the film aimed at.
And you do that wonderfully. For the listeners who may not know who Maria Callas is, can you just give a little brief synopsis about who she is? We have younger people who are listening to the show who may not be aware of who she is. And you weren't aware of who she was either until 5 years ago. So, yes.
I wasn't aware 5 years ago, and the way the film was made was always on both sides. I mean, I always had in mind to give satisfaction at the same time to the people who know her, who are admirers of her, and who will get to discover a lot of never before seen or heard material in the film, and maybe who can discover new aspects about her personality, both as a woman and as an artist that they may have not known before. But also I always kept in mind the young guy that I was when I started this 5 years ago, and keeping the film very accessible, making it accessible to everyone, whether people know her, don't know her, whether they have heard of her name, or whether they know nothing at all. And the film is very approachable. It's a great way to discover who she was, even to discover opera, because I have discovered opera thanks to her, and I think it's a great way. And it's not all about opera. There is of course, there are several moments of it in the film, because that's what her professional life was about, and her dedication and her devotion was to opera. But also, just as a human story, the story of the woman and the destiny is just such an incredible story that it could have been a novel. It could have been a film written, because coming from a very modest background, rather poor family of Greek immigrants in New York, and then going through the war in Greece, in Athens, in her teenage years, and then coming to Italy with nothing, not a cent in her pocket, and having to struggle for some years to get that career and to become recognized, and then becoming this world figure, icon, living legend, international fame and all of that. It's an incredible destiny, and we follow all that in the film from beginning to end. And it's really, I think it's breathtaking, the life that she had, both her personal life and her career.
I agree, and she talks a lot about destiny, her destiny. I love, because she refers to herself, too, in two ways. I mean, in the interview she did with David Frost, which is, you interspersed throughout the film, that interview, which she just looks stunningly beautiful. I don't know when that was. What year was that? It was
December 1970 in New York.
Oh, December 1970.
Yes, and it's incredible because, that interview aired only once, live, and it was not recorded, it was not preserved, and everyone thought that it was lost for the last nearly 50 years. And it was one of Callas's close friends who had preserved the only copy of it. So we can see it today in the film for the very first time in nearly 50 years. It's quite amazing.
That is amazing.
And it's such a particular interview. To me, it's so much more than an interview. It's a confession. It's the way she talks is really from her heart, and you see much more Maria than Callas, because there is always this duality that we understand throughout the film, and she speaks much more as a woman, and almost looking back, although she was rather young still, but it was a certain moment in her life. It was a couple years after Onassis, the love of her life, had broken up with her and married Jackie Kennedy, and she had put her career on standby. So she was like in the middle of her personal life and her career, not really knowing the way forward. And David Frost just caught her off guard at that time. And the way we hear her is a confession about who she truly is and how she looks at herself, and also looking back at her life and career, because she already was, down the road of a huge career that had started in the early 50s.
That interview is so telling, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we come back after these brief messages. You are listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. And please go to my Facebook page, The Jan Price Show, and please like the show. You'll get updates on current shows that are going to be aired, and go to thejanpriceshow.com to listen to some archive shows in case you missed them when they were broadcast. They're on the website, thejanpriceshow.com.
The Ozio Theater in downtown Monterey is now open every day, showing independent and foreign films. The Ozio Theater has new concession offerings, including beer, wine, hard cider, and their homemade Lush Slush. You can now schedule private event screenings for community charity events, birthdays, anniversaries, or just a fun gathering of friends. For more information, visit the Ozio Theater online at oziotheater.com.
Tired of looking at your worn wood floors? Mr. Sandless can bring them back to life again. That's right. It's Mr. Sandless, the no sanding solution to beautiful wood floors. Mr. Sandless is clean, efficient, contains no harmful chemicals, and is certified green. Mr. Sandless refinishes all hardwoods, softwoods, engineered flooring, and laminates. Most jobs are completed in one day with no cleanup required ever, with virtually no odor, and is safe for pets and kids. No need to move out or even leave the house. Mr. Sandless is the company that invented Sandless Refinishing and is the largest floor refinishing company in the world. Over 120,000 happy customers, guaranteed adhesion, guaranteed satisfaction, and a 5-year warranty. Call Mr. Sandless today at 831-747-7476. That's 747-7476. Or MrSandless.com. That's MrSandless.com.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1, streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is director, writer, producer Tom Volf, and we're talking about his new documentary, Maria by Callas, which is about the greatest opera singer ever, Maria Callas. And before we went into the break, Tom, you were talking a little bit about this interview with David Frost, which just, you're right, it's very, very, she's very reflective in it and very open. And I love that. She was open and vulnerable when she was talking, and she does refer to herself in two different ways, one as Maria and one as Callas. And I guess that's why you chose to call the movie Maria by Callas. But how did you locate? You said one of her dear friends had this interview. How did they preserve it, and how did you find out about it?
Oh, it's quite incredible. You see, every time I visited these people who oftentimes lived in very remote places, and also oftentimes the people who were closest to her had refused in the last 40 years since her passing to be part of any project, even not give a single interview. And I think they really got on board with this project because they felt that the film would not be biased by any outside opinion or gossip stories or anything, that it would be entirely genuine. And I was very moved to hear them saying that this is what she would have wanted and that she never managed to do. She actually had in mind for many years to write her own biography to set the record straight, as she used to say. So, all these encounters, as I said, brought out the material from these people who were just trying to help in contributing to making the movie. And that David Frost tape was part of a number of material that I was entrusted with by one of her friends. And the way it was preserved is quite incredible because, of course, in 1970 you didn't have tape recorders yet. So her friend actually had to film the television screen with a Super 8 camera and then recorded the sound on a reel-to-reel recorder separately. So when we got all of that, we, of course, undertook a certain amount of work of restoration and bring it all back in high definition and accessible to everyone, image and sound-wise today. So it's like, this interview is literally reborn with the film Maria by Callas.
Amazing. I mean, that is amazing. First of all, the ingenuity of the friend who decided to do that to begin with.
I'm sorry. What?
I said, it's amazing the ingenuity of the person who decided to record that interview.
Yes, I know.
I mean, with a camera and a Super 8, tape recorder. I mean, that's just amazing right there.
I think that some of the people around her had a sense that, her appearances were so rare that they would need to be preserved for future generations. I think that it was a sixth sense that they had. And thank God they did.
Yes, because that is the thread throughout the film, which I just loved, and watching that. Let's talk about the archival footage, because you've got many of her amazing performances, and including the one in Rome, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Mm-hmm. How did you go about finding all of this archival footage?
Well, it was really in two steps, shall we say. The first step, as I said earlier, was through her friends. And that brought a lot of the private home movies, private recordings and letters, private photos, photo albums, and things like that make a part of the film. And then I went on my own in-depth research, again, all around the world, and I researched every possible archive, private, institutional, you name it, and tried to dig out as much material as possible from all those countries, because she, traveled the world in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So the material, the very few bits of material that was available was scattered. And then I ended up having all those pieces of a large puzzle that I had to put back together, and to that we dedicated 6 months of editing the film, which was really about putting back the pieces together and make one full picture that was clear and smooth to look at. So, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it is amazing. I mean, it truly is. I just loved, you're going to see her perform. I mean, it's what's so beautiful about the movie is that you actually get to see her in many of her performances. And
of course. And I think the fact that the film is coming out in the theaters is precisely an opportunity to get to see her perform and see her performances in concerts and operas, because of course it's just one part of the film, because all the rest is just her life story, and it's quite incredible. It's quite an opera in itself,
yes,
we could say. But seeing her and hearing her perform in a theater nowadays, I think is the closest experience that you can get to people who were actually in the audience back in the days in the opera houses and attending her performances. Because, you're there in the theater and you see her on the large screen. It's really an experience. It's an immersive experience that I think to everyone, whether you know or don't know Maria Callas, will really bring you on a journey, on a ride.
It definitely will take you on a ride, but if you have never listened to Maria Callas, I highly recommend, definitely going to see this movie, for sure, but also, searching the internet, and like you did, and find some of her recordings, which prompted this passion project. So how did you go about? You interviewed, how many people did you interview? And you interviewed
Nearly
for over
30.
And that was over a year period of time.
Yes.
You said, but then you decided not to do the interviews. But before we go into why you chose not to, how did you find the people to interview? I mean, that had to be daunting in its own way, to find people who were still alive, who knew her.
Of course.
Because she died relatively young, at age 53.
She died in 1977 at age 53. So, yeah.
So she'd be 93 now if she was still alive.
Yeah.
So
and
go ahead.
and obviously the people who were her friends were all over 80 when I met them, and they were very difficult to find. As I said, some of them lived in very, very remote places. So, from my own research, I had some names already, but sometimes I didn't even know if they were alive or not. Of course, I'm speaking of the anonymous, the friends, the people who were really in her close circle, shall we say? Because I also went to meet, shall we say, her famous friends. Like Franco Zeffirelli, for example, who I was very lucky to meet a few times in Rome, and that was also very difficult. So you see, the people who were not famous, it was very difficult to find them and to retrieve them and to find where they lived and to get their contact details and all of that. But then the famous people, it was very hard to approach them too, because as you can imagine, they get approached a lot, and getting them to understand that this was an important project and that it was worthwhile, being part of it. It took some time and effort, but I'm very, very happy and lucky that every single one of the people I reached, in the end, I was able to meet them, and I was able to have their blessing and their contribution for the project. And
how, by interviewing them, how did that change your perception of Maria Callas? Well,
you see, I think, fortunately, one of the reasons perhaps that made me do this project is I wasn't under any influence, because I didn't know who she was 5 years ago. So as I was getting to know her, as I was discovering her, gradually, I was making those encounters, and all of these people nourished me with, not only with stories, but also with feelings. What it was like to be around her at certain times of her life, and this nourished a very true understanding of who she was, and I think it helped me tremendously throughout the process in bringing the material together. Because anyhow, when you watch the film today, this is only her speaking from beginning to end, with, shall we say, the exception of her letters that are spoken by Joyce DiDonato, that are interpreted so beautifully by Joyce.
Yes.
But it is still her own words. Therefore, you get a very close feeling, a close understanding of who she was, and this is really what I was seeking. And I think meeting all these people was part of that, part of getting closer to her.
Yeah, I definitely. No, how did you find the journals that Joyce DiDonato reads?
Again, so the film has a certain amount of letters, and those were letters that were given to me by the various people that I met, and also some of them were kept in private archives. Again, all of this material was scattered, and it would have been beautiful and too easy to find just one, stock of letters and have all the material ready for the film. It was really piece by piece, drop by drop, that this material arrived, and again, very gradually over the 4 years of the work that I dedicated to it. And then the journals, you see, she, as I said earlier, really wanted to write her biography, And she started dictating some notes at different stages of her life, actually. Some of her friends had a copy of that and had the transcription. And this is what we used to take the quintessence of it in the film. And the way that we worked with Joyce really beautifully was to just bring out those letters on top of images on screen, of footage that correspond to precisely to the time where she was writing those words. So it's all very consistent and very genuine. And I like to think that towards the end of the film, we have those two voices, the voice of Maria speaking herself and then the voice of Joyce with Maria's words. And I think we tend to forget that there are two voices, and it's only one voice in the end because it is the voice of Maria.
Yes, and it's beautiful. It really is beautiful. We're going to be right back after these brief messages. You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. And go to the Jan Price Show on Facebook and go like the page on Facebook, and you'll get updates on what's going on with the show there. And also check out thejanpriceshow.com if you want to listen to past shows that you may have missed when they were broadcast.
The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled with luxury loungers in every auditorium. Oversized plush recliners are electric-powered reclining seats with extendable footrests, cup holders, and snack tables. Guaranteed comfort with all reserved seating. Reserve the best seat in town online at Cinemark.com or download the Cinemark app today. The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is director, writer, producer Tom Volf, and we're talking about his new documentary, Maria by Callas, about the most astonishing opera singer that ever lived, I think. So you had interviewed, you spent a year or more interviewing at least 30 different friends of Maria Callas's, and then you decided not to go that route. And so what made you change your mind and decide to do it in her voice and her words?
Well, it was, as I said earlier, it was really coming from the material. It was, at some point, just, over a year I was traveling, meeting those people, and then I just sat down with all the material that I gathered and that they trusted me, and I just realized that there just might be enough to make an entire film in her own words. So it's very hard to describe, it just felt right. And the most incredible thing is when I got back to her friends later on, explaining to them that I had, made this big change and that I was basically starting from scratch. I mean, not literally, but it was a completely different film. It was much more ambitious and challenging, actually. And I was really, really touched that they all unanimously said to me, well done, this is what she would have wanted, and this is what has never been done and what should be done about her. And, it just encouraged me to go further in that direction. And I think also I was really interested, having had a background as a filmmaker, as I said, in different fields, it was really interesting to me to make a documentary that would not look like a documentary, that would not be like the standard documentary where, people are interviewed and say she was like this, she was like that, but really working on this as a film, as an actual movie, because as I said earlier, her life could have been a novel. It's such an incredible destiny and so many moments, of tragedy, also of drama. It is a dramatic life, in a sense. And so I worked on making the film as I would have making an actual movie. The only difference is what I was using was not the shots that I would have filmed, that's 100% of archival material. But, choosing every frame, choosing some close-ups, to get in the moment with her, to a certain scenes, like for instance the divorce episode that you see in the film, and you feel the intensity of all the press which is there to harassing her, and everyone coming out of the court hearing for the divorce that she couldn't get ultimately, because in those days when a woman filed for divorce and her husband refused, she couldn't obtain it. So that was part of her struggle in her personal life. But in scenes like that, I think you really get a sense, very cinematographical, of the moment and of how it unravels, and you're really in the action. You are in the middle of it as an audience. You get a feeling for it, and I think that is the work we did with Janice Jones in editing and in choosing the right shots and the rhythm, the pacing of the film, to get that sense of intensity of moments like this. So it was much more interesting in the end to do it in this way, but much more challenging, of course. Also, it really felt, I oftentimes say, it felt like climbing Mount Everest without oxygen.
Oh. Wow, that's really difficult, for sure. That's a very good analogy there, Tom. So in this, what did you find was the most surprising aspect of Maria Callas that you didn't know? Well, I'm sure you didn't know a lot of things before when you went into this, but that really, truly surprised you the most.
There's so many things throughout, and I think many things will surprise people who know her or who think they know her or of her when they watch the film. To me, I have to say that the first most tremendous thing that surprised me was when I discovered the Frost interview, not even knowing that it was so precious and rare and that it was considered to be lost, but the content of it and the moment that I decided to have as the opening of the film, when she says there are actually two people in me, Maria and Callas, and that understanding, when the rest of what she says in that moment, is such a key to understanding who she was and what her life was about, and how her whole life was a struggle in this duality between Maria and Callas, between her life as a woman and her life as an artist and the public figure that she became, and how throughout her whole life she had to sacrifice one for another. That brought me such a deep understanding and deep feeling of connection with her that it was really striking. And it's interesting because she has never said that before or after. It is this only moment that she just gave away that key about herself.
Yes, and it's a beautiful moment, too. I mean, when you watch the film, and it just gives you a really deep insight to who she was and how she felt about herself and her destiny.
I think the whole film is about insights, because you get insights about the woman and also about the artist, because you get to see her on stage and off stage and backstage, and you understand better what made her who she was.
Yes, you do. And one of the things, I mean, she ended up having this terrible reputation for being tempestuous and a diva and all of the above. And you address this in the film, and have footage of the famous Rome concert that she was to perform. Was that Norma? Was that going to be Norma that
right,
day? Okay,
right.
Norma.
In 1958.
In 58, and halfway through the performance, she decided she could not come back on. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because that was really a defining moment in her career.
Absolutely. It was a defining moment, a very unexpected moment, and it's such an interesting thing to approach a moment like this, that when you read any book about Callas or any article, it would mention this, or it would thoroughly go about that event as the scandal, so-called. And there were a few so-called scandals that were following her reputation. And so many times, these were all built on opinions or on the tabloids of those days, who actually created the scandal where there was no scandal to begin with. And this incident in Rome in 1958 could have been just a simple incident that happens to any artist, any singer that one day catches a cold and just cannot go on. But for her, you understand, it comes a little bit, it's the first part of the film, but already a little later on when you understand, you get to understand that in 1958 she was at the peak of her career. She was a world celebrity. She was singing in every country, doing concert tours and operas across Europe, across America. And this event happens when she's that high that we could think she can only go down from such a high place. That's actually what she says herself. But anyway, that night, she was just happened to have a cold. And they literally pushed her on stage for the first act of Norma, which she did as best as she could. And as soon as she came out of stage, she had completely lost her voice by that time, and she just couldn't go on. But it happened to be the opening night of the Rome Opera, January 2nd, 1958, and the whole elite of Italy, and even the rest of the world, was there. The president of Italy was there that night in the theater, and the pressure was so strong that also the misunderstanding was at the same level as the pressure and the fame, because the misunderstanding was that everyone thought she wouldn't go on because she was capricious and tempestuous and being a diva, whereas in truth, she was just sick and she had completely lost her voice. And so in the film, we go about that event gradually. You know, we started almost minute by minute, and you see her. What's amazing is that you actually see the footage from that night, and you see footage of her backstage when she's preparing to go on, and then you see her coming out, and you see that something's wrong. Like, she definitely doesn't feel well. And then you see her the following day, and those crowds of people harassing her, the press, and there are, you know, writings on the walls around the opera insulting her, because they really all felt like she was being capricious and they felt insulted, whereas the gap between what people thought and what was actually happening was so huge. So again, thanks to the letters and the journals, we were really able to set the record straight. And I think to hear her speaking about the event and how she lived it, because what she writes is only a few days after the event, so it's very fresh the way she recounts it, and you know, she describes the violence that she had to go through for all the days to come, and how all the press around the world made their main titles with this event, and how much injustice there was in all of this. And this event was definitely a pivot point in her life, because it actually was so violent that it would lead her to start giving up part of her career, and it would lead her to have stage fright, which she never had before. But that was such a traumatic event that later on she would start having issues with her voice because of the stage fright. And it's so heartbreaking to see that, and to see how it all happened to her.
It really is heartbreaking, and you're right, it was a defining moment in her life and in her career. We're going to be right back after these brief messages. You're listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Please go to The Jan Price Show on Facebook, and please like The Jan Price Show on Facebook. You'll get updates about future shows and what's going on with The Jan Price Show, and also thejanpriceshow.com. Go check that out and listen to past shows that you may have missed when they were broadcast.
The Ozio Theater in downtown Monterey is now open every day, showing independent and foreign films. The Ozio Theater has new concession offerings, including beer, wine, hard cider, and their homemade Lush Slush. You can now schedule private event screenings for community charity events, birthdays, anniversaries, or just a fun gathering of friends. For more information, visit the Ozio Theater online at oziotheater.com.
Tired of looking at your worn wood floors? Mr. Sandless can bring them back to life again. That's right. It's Mr. Sandless, the no sanding solution to beautiful wood floors. Mr. Sandless is clean, efficient, contains no harmful chemicals, and is certified green. Mr. Sandless refinishes all hardwoods, softwoods, engineered flooring, and laminates. Most jobs are completed in one day with no cleanup required ever, with virtually no odor, and is safe for pets and kids. No need to move out or even leave the house. Mr. Sandless is the company that invented Sandless Refinishing and is the largest floor refinishing company in the world. Over 120,000 happy customers, guaranteed adhesion, guaranteed satisfaction, and a 5-year warranty. Call Mr. Sandless today at 831-747-7476. That's 747-7476. Or MrSandless.com. That's MrSandless.com.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1. Streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is director, writer, producer Tom Volf, and we're talking about his new documentary, Maria by Callas, about Maria Callas. After the Rome cancellation, which we were talking about before the break, she was banned, wasn't she, from performing in Italy?
Absolutely, she was banned from performing in Rome, and she did only one additional performance at La Scala in Milan, and then she also was not welcome anymore. And it's again all about destiny, because you see that it's a leitmotif with her, this concept of destiny and how things unravel, because it's less than a year after that she gets to meet Aristotle Onassis and falls in love, and that is the man for whom she will decide to give up a big part of her career and dedicate herself to her life as a woman. So the struggle between Maria and Callas kind of turns around, whereas before it was Maria who was sacrificed for Callas. Now it will be Callas who is sacrificed for Maria, and to allow her to live her life as a woman and as a woman in love. So it all kind of links together, and the Rome event is almost like a starting point of a domino that is going to just fall piece by piece in the following years of her life.
Well, now that you've brought up Aristotle Onassis, which I definitely wanted to talk more about, the love of her life, who, it's been said that they were soulmates. Let's talk a little bit about that relationship, because it was such a significant part of her life and his life too. And then, and also let's talk about, when he married Jackie Kennedy, how that must have devastated her, and it did devastate her, because you read about it in the press, didn't she? He didn't even tell her.
That's right.
And that would be, would break any woman's heart, but I can't even imagine. It's like, you're with someone and then you realize, you read that he married someone else, and you have to read about it, on the internet.
Yeah, of course. I think it nearly broke her, and the way that you see it unravel in the film is, again, thanks to the letters, where we get the most intimate feelings that she was experiencing at that time, and she's writing to her closest, one of her closest friends, who was her, like a second mother to her. She was, Elvira de Hidalgo was her singing teacher back when she was a young girl in Athens, and she kept that relationship with her over the years, and this is the rare person to whom she would confess her feelings and her hurt at the time of the breakup and when Onassis married Jackie. So, you know, it was a really intense relationship. It, you know, started off, as I said, in 1959, and it shattered both of their worlds, actually. They were both extremely famous already at that time, and both married. So they both filed for divorce. Both had complications with that in those days, especially her. And nevertheless, they started off this romance, which was in the eye of the whole world, because every media would cover that story, and they would be followed and photographed wherever they would go. So it was very challenging to, you know, besides the love story, to be able to just, you know, live it as any normal human being would want to live a love story that is starting and a romance. But for them, it was different. It couldn't have been a normal relationship, and therefore for a few years they lived like that, and they, you know, tried to hide on holidays, on cruises in Greece, which also it's very moving to see the home movies of Callas in the film of those cruises with Onassis, and there's just the two of them on the boat, and you see just, you know, two teenagers, you know, Greek teenagers. That's what it feels like, I think, and not at all the famous diva and the famous businessman, because you have to recall that Onassis in those days was one of the most famous businessmen in the world. You know, he was a ship owner, and he was extremely famous already. But of course, he also was a man who had a greed for power and a greed for more fame, I guess, more recognition, because he was really a boy from a very poor family in Greece. I think nearly half of his family died in the war in Greece, and he had, you know, become this great famous businessman. And when Jackie Kennedy appeared in the picture a few years after the assassination of her husband, she was in those days what they called the most famous widow in the world. And I think Onassis just couldn't resist, after having had, or shall we say, been associated with the most famous diva in the world, to have Jackie. I think it was about being the one who would get her, in a way, and associate his name with hers. So it was not really about love or anything, but it was something else. Mm-hmm. However, what's really interesting, and that's something we learn and follow in the film, is how his relationship with Callas remained. And despite his marriage with Jackie, he was back in her life fairly soon, in Callas's life, and they started this other kind of relationship, which she calls in the film a passionate friendship, where we're not really sure if they were lovers or not, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is that the connection and the relationship remain, and all throughout till the end of Onassis' life. And actually, you realize that Callas passed away only a year and a half after Onassis. And I believe in the end that they were truly soulmates, that it was probably Onassis admitted as a mistake. I think he did admit to that. Callas writes about it, and we hear it in the film, that he did admit the marriage being a mistake. But nevertheless, she forgave him, and the relationship remained. Of course, it was not as before, because suddenly Callas became the other woman, and it was not an easy place for her. I don't think it's an easy place for anyone, but for her, especially, being someone with a lot of pride and also certain values, I guess, right, about the relationship she was dreaming of. That was not exactly what she had expected. But still, it's really interesting to find out how she coped with it and how she went about it, and also how she tried to turn back to her career after a few years of absence. And this comeback tour towards the end of the film that was so often called afterwards the farewell tour, by complete mistake, because it was not at all a farewell tour. She was not prepared to make her farewell yet. It was a comeback tour, and because of the fact that she died only 3 years later, people call it now the farewell tour. So yeah.
Yeah, very, again, more tragedy in her life. We're going to be right back after this brief messages. You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies, on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. Like the Jan Price Show on Facebook, and you will see upcoming shows on Facebook, and you can keep up on what's going on with the show, and also check out thejanpriceshow.com to listen to shows that you might have missed when they were first aired.
The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled with luxury loungers in every auditorium. Oversized plush recliners are electric-powered reclining seats with extendable footrests, cup holders, and snack tables. Guaranteed comfort with all reserved seating. Reserve the best seat in town online at Cinemark.com or download the Cinemark app today. The Century Theater at Northridge Mall is newly remodeled.
On Power Talk AM 1460 and FM 101.1, streaming worldwide on iHeartRadio. Jan Price talks to the movers and shakers in the film business. The Jan Price Show.
We are back, and my guest today is director, writer, producer Tom Volf, and we're talking about his new documentary, Maria by Callas, about the amazing opera singer Maria Callas. We only have a couple more minutes left, Tom. Do you she died at age 53 of a heart attack. That was surprising and shocking for me because it's very young. Had she had a history of heart problems or anything that would have...
Not at all. And that's what's striking in the film, that it's just happening, suddenly and surprisingly. And again, as I said earlier, only a year and a half after Onassis died, which I think might have a correlation. I mean,
yes, I thought
it was a heart attack, and she was probably heartbroken.
Yes, so, that's what I felt too. It was a broken heart, that she died from a broken heart.
Yeah.
If she didn't have any health problems up to that point.
I mean, she had a difficult life. I mean, she nearly died in the war in Athens when she was around 15, and she had a career that was such a strain. No opera singer, I think, has ever sung as much and as vast of a repertoire as she did in the 50s. It was incredible, but it was also physically a huge strain, and all the traveling. You can imagine she was traveling the world. In the 50s was not like today. I think she would have to take boats and several flights to get into one place for one performance and then move on to the next one. So she had a life that had been a strain all throughout, and I think it took its toll on the voice and on the body. So yeah, by the time she was in her early 50s, she already had gotten weaker. She does write in her letters about having a very low, poor blood pressure and things like that.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
As I said, also she had acquired this stage fright that after the Rome incident had become overwhelming most of the time.
Tom, it's been. I hate to say this, but we've run out of time. But I think everybody should see this film. Where can they see this movie?
Well, the movie is opening in theaters across America. I think it's starting with New York and LA, November 2nd, in theaters there, and then it will start opening in various cities. I think it's opening in San Francisco the following week, and it should be in all theaters ultimately across the country, thanks to Sony Pictures Classics, who is distributing the film in America.
Yes. Yes. Well, I highly recommend seeing this movie. If you've never gone to an opera in your life and you don't know anything about Maria Callas, go see this because you will be in for such a treat. You really will. Thank you, Tom, and thank you for your passion and this beautiful film. It
was my pleasure to share this with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You have been listening to The Jan Price Show, all about movies on Power Talk 1460 and 101 FM. And like The Jan Price Show on Facebook, and also check out thejanpriceshow.com.